What do you need to know?
What I need to know, yeah, fuck, man, there's so many things. There's so many things I could ask you right now. But let's just start for everybody who's just tuning in, never heard about you, never saw the name Luke Brown, never saw your art. Who are you?
Man, that's not easy to answer.
It's a good question, right?
Who am I? I mean, that's a good question to ask yourself every day. Who am I?
Are you asking that to yourself every day?
not consistently, but I think it's a good spiritual practice. Just bring your awareness there to that, the observer state, the witness state that's experiencing your life.
But maybe in a more 3D materialistic sense, how would you answer that question right now?
What's on my promotional pamphlet?
Yeah.
Luke Brown, artist, beauty enthusiast, exuberance specialist.
Beauty enthusiast sounds interesting. What do you consider beauty? Like, how would you consider that?
I mean, my whole being has a response to beauty. It's like a life-affirming feeling, a kind of upliftment of the senses, something that elevates my frequency. I'm an inspiration junkie. It's like I can be fueled by inspiration. And yeah, I mean, my creative practice is, I treat it like a spiritual discipline. It's this place where my attention goes that uplifts me and elevates me and makes me feel a connection to a higher dimension of intelligence and orchestration. It's guiding my life. And yeah, it's something that I've been learning over the course of my life, how real that is. And yeah, I mean, this is a full dedication for me, this path that I'm on.
Yeah, because beauty is an interesting thing for me. I used to be very focused on beauty in terms of like beautiful people, beautiful places. I was searching for beauty in the world. And then also on my spiritual journey, I would say, I started to encounter the beauty. I try to see the beauty everywhere, like to basically not search for it, but see that it's everywhere. So I don't know, how would you consider beauty in your everyday life? Like, what is the concrete places where you can encounter beauty for you? Is it your art, or is it like nature, or where does it go?
Yeah, I mean, nature is the number one resource, I think. And yeah, it's not a superficial thing. It's not some surface level candy for the senses. There's something much deeper than that for me. It's a source of life affirmation and connection, some transference of a higher order that takes the form of what we can consider beauty. And yeah, there's something, it's like there's a fuel to it, I'm driven by it and oriented towards it. And yeah, I want my art to be communicating that, to have some kind of merit behind it that isn't just like a superficial eye candy, but has some kind of spiritual substance that is beneficial to the viewer. As I receive that from my experience of hyper appreciation of the beauty of the world and of nature and of human nature, and I want to translate that, have my art be a byproduct of that also achieves the same effect.
Yeah, man, this is exactly where I got sold. Literally, when I saw your art the first time here on the art exhibition in Cali, that's when I met you. I saw the art and I was like, wow, this is good stuff. I was like, wow. And I looked at it, but then when I listened to you and you said something about that this is basically channeling through you. It's almost like you're just the medium, and that there's like something inside of you. And that's, for me, was the first time where I was like realizing how crazy it has to be in that process. Like you talked about, like sometimes working for 10 hours and you forget to eat, and I mean, we have a I would say an example of your work here now. Since we're talking about beauty, maybe you can also show this new how would you call it, masterpiece, or what is it?
Well,
is it the baby? Is it a is it hard for you to sell your own art, like when you do it and then to give it away?
I mean, I've had to learn to be less attached and know that my creativity is never going to run out. Mm-hmm. It's, if I can trust that it's an ongoing development to greater levels of skill and substance, then in a way it's a good motivation to let it go, to make room for more to come.
Maybe we can talk a little bit about what would you consider the name of this piece?
I was calling it Spectralize.
Spectralize. Like
EYES, Spectralize, which is a kind of moniker I was carrying for a while there. It's like my art name, when I was putting it on events. Mostly when I was doing events in the United States where I'm not a citizen, so I didn't want to promote myself as, being a part of any kind of money-making experience in the United States. So
dangerous, huh?
Yeah, so Spectralize was kind of my, I don't know, as DJs would have their moniker, this was my art moniker. Okay. And so it's actually, it's a remake of a mural that I had done almost 20 years ago now in a yoga studio in Vancouver. I got an opportunity to do this, 10-foot tall painting, which has now been painted over. It's no longer there. But yeah, it was a composition that I really loved and felt like it was a very emblematic of a particular condition or a quality, a state of consciousness, like a symbolic state. Kind of like crafting your own life, being the master of your destiny, and the invocation of like the presence of a kind of like coming into congruent vibration with the sentient intelligence of the universe, that all is one, all is consciousness expressing itself, all is awareness, all is mind, and coming to that awakened state and coming into vibrational congruency with it and allowing that to channel its way in and open all your eyes to see the true nature of reality. And so there's like this kind of feedback loop effect of like the seeing and then the application of what has been seen, so that the translation into a creative act through art is the feedback loop that is the result of the awakening, which then results in more awakening or more of a foundation from that awakening state.
Like becoming the creator. Like that's what I also feel was so interesting for me to talk with you about, because you in your biography you talked about that you were already very, as a kid, very into art. So you already had this idea of like, hey, there's something in my head and I can somehow like create something in the outside world, from the inside to the outside. Yeah,
I think there was always something really revelatory and magical about that when I was a kid. Seeing the outcome, just having this compulsion to create and do something. I don't know where that comes from. It's just, being oriented in a certain way where I'm just like compelled to do this, and then I have a result of it that is my internal self is now on the outside, and I can show that to someone else of what the inside looks like. But yeah, and I didn't really consider myself an artist. Like that's my working title, you know. I'm just myself doing what I'm compelled to do. I didn't really commit to making works of art when I was younger. It wasn't until I was 17 and I had a really radical, transformative life course altering experience that really made it abundantly clear that this is what it was all about. That this is what I need to be fully dedicated to and not treat it like a casual hobby on the side, but that this is like, yeah, it was so glaringly obvious that this is what I'm here to do. And so, yeah, from that point on, I was just wholeheartedly dedicated to making art and being intentional about the process too. Where like almost like ritualistic about it in the way that I would create the space and the environment to get into it. Yeah. And this feeling of like opening myself up to the creative conduit that I cannot identify with as my own. It is just simply the creative conduit that is informing everything. By inviting that in and like being aware of that, I think created the most opportunity for magic to occur. If I'm not in a process of like narrating my own process or overthinking it, but just finding a kind of uninterrupted flow state is where things just start to happen. And the more I can sustain that state, the more the potential for, a higher magic that I couldn't have planned.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm curious about, because there's always two different ways to get ahead in life. It's either through creation, like you actually create something, or you solve problems. Like that's I would say the default state of people's way to get ahead or get around is like, I'm solving a problem. And then if I don't have a problem, I don't ask myself, what could I create? I'm just waiting until the next problem comes. So would you say that this is something you're still, is this like a cyclical thing where sometimes everybody just comes into the problem solving mode? Or would you say as an artist, you literally just hacked reality, that everything you do is almost like a creation?
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that feeling of like hacking the underlying fabric and having a kind of, I don't know, like a natural skill set just emerging from that place. But yeah, it's all about the flow state really, and that can apply to anything you're doing. Just, yeah, inviting a kind of creative outlook to whatever you're doing. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm choosing very particular mediums to work with, but it's not solely exclusive to those mediums. I mean, I think I'm just generally creative. No matter what I do, it's going to have that kind of twist on it, just to keep the novelty fresh in my life with whatever I'm doing. But yeah, I mean, people that work with numbers or work with engineering, or anything where you can just kind of get out of your own personal narrative state and allowing a kind of universal narrative to insert itself and channel its way through. And what I've learned over the course of my life is that because I've chosen to be so dedicated to this process, to be committed to that kind of flow state means I have to fine tune everything. Inspired me to devote that to my diet, my lifestyle, where I choose to live, what kinds of people I choose to be around, what kinds of environments I want to be in, just being really physical, being active, being healthy in every way. And all of that contributes beneficially to that flow state. It's like, it's all pointing at that. I don't want to have any kind of stagnation anywhere. I want to just be an open conduit, free flowing, no resistance in the circuit.
And how do you deal with resistance? Like, or let's say like this, like when you talk about spiritual practice, how do you practice spirituality? Like, how, besides obviously expanding through your art, like what is your daily bread and butter in that sense?
Well, I mean, I've lived my life in a way where I can adapt and I can change. And if there are things that come up that just don't feel quite right, then I give myself the right to listen to that and work with that. I don't have to compromise that state where it's just like, oh, my life is so uncomfortable and I'm just like not enjoying this, but I'm just going to go along with it anyway. It's kind of like, okay, something's not in alignment. I need to address that and keep, yeah, I'm fortunate that I've lived in a way where I don't have that kind of accountability to someone else's vision or having to show up to an office every day to someone else's vision of a company. It's like, I'm the company, I'm the CEO, and I'm choosing the direction. And if I need to make cutbacks, I will. If I need to relocate, then I will. It's like it's been an incredible experiment in mutability and adaptability, with the focus on being committed to this creative path.
And when you say that you basically try to be in the flow state and you try to basically be the creator of your own life, how do you see it with planning and commitment? For example, since you had a lot of like art exhibitions in your life, a lot of like gigs and like people who are still counting on you, how do you manage this like those two very opposing worlds? This one of like commitment, certain parts of discipline and planning, where you have to be almost very strongly in your mind and identified with the story and the time and space.
I mean, all those kinds of things they're great for me. And it's not like, oh God, I have to do this thing, It's just like, it's just, there are certain things that are incredible motivators to keep thinking outside the framework and to test myself and not be complacent. So having certain markers on the horizon that, I don't think having an art exhibition in some country that I've never been to before is like, oh God, I have to do this,
But it's still a lot of like work to do that.
It is,
right?
yeah.
Like to manage as a CEO, to manage it, all of that stuff.
Yeah, but work, play, it's kind of a gray area. It's intermingling.
Yeah, exactly. It's just because so many people, when they hear artists, they have like this idea of what it means to be an artist. Like there's a person who's like sitting in their studio and like they're doing art, but maybe you can also help to understand that the listener can a little bit understand how much comes into this result of being, for example, Luke Brown, with your paintings, with your sculptures, with your persona, all the things you've accomplished. It's not just the painting, right? Like there has to be more to it. So maybe you can like explain to people a little bit
like
what
the
it takes.
The management of all of the rest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how do I compress this idea?
For example, when you were 17 years old, you started to realize, oh, there is more in life. This is my path. But from your 17-year-old Luke to let's say 10 years later, or like today, there were a lot of like those lessons you probably learned of like
yeah, huge ones.
Yeah.
It's been equally as much a spiritual progression as a skill set progression. And yeah, I guess I've been following this path of, it's like a path of kinesiological orientation where I'm just moved in certain directions. I follow these paths that feel in alignment and have led me to the right places, to the right people, to the right times, to the right conditions. And I've been kind of, in a way, almost like mapping all of the qualities that create those conditions. And I've had just absolutely magnificent, astonishing experiences with synchronicity, and on levels that are just so mind-blowing to me, that are so outside the realm of mental contemplation. It's like these events and sequences of events that happen that just are so mind-blowing, and arriving in a particular situation, meeting the right person that brings in the right element that I need at that time, or like connections that happen. And I observe that. I'm like, well, what made that happen? What orientation in the matrix opened the way for that to appear rather than something else that's not ideal or optimal at all? And it all really is coming back to keeping my awareness on my imagination of myself and trusting that there's a higher orchestration to this, and that I'm always in the right place. I'm always in the right condition. I'm always there, in right alignment if I so choose. It's just like really where my attention is. And yeah, I mean, I can open up so many levels of that, of, finding myself meeting absolutely remarkable people that have brought in the elements that I've needed to fill in the picture of what it is that I'm doing here, and making connections with, people in the art world or people that are, benevolent benefactors and want to support what it is that I'm doing, or making connections to places where I've been brought on to such an elevated level of exposure to another audience that I've always wanted to connect to. And it's just a series of events that just like drop into place. And I'm like, oh, now I'm here. Wow, how amazing how that happened. It's like, and then looking back, it's like, well, am I just lucky? Am I just like some cosmic anomaly where I've like got good karma and everything's just working out for me? Or is there something about the way that I interact with the world, and like, what is it about the quality that I'm choosing to cultivate in myself that then naturally reflects as a byproduct into the matrix, that just brings me into vibration with the right places? And I mean, that's really how I have to look at it, because some of the ways that it's unfolded is just like unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's like unbelievable to rigid minds that can't grasp that I really don't feel that I'm at the mercy of a cold and uncaring universe. And it's just allowed me to be an optimist at heart as my default setting.
So you would consider life as good, rather than neutral, or even bad, right?
Yeah. What's the best that could happen?
Yeah.
That's kind of how I'm oriented. And yeah, it's like that's where my compass is. It's like I'm in a joyous expectancy of the best. And I really feel that, and that's been the process of my life that has cultivated that and allowed me to get here. It didn't just happen. But I think it really starts with a place of a willingness to surrender to a higher intelligence, higher orchestration that has my best interest in mind, that I'm loved unconditionally by the source of creation, and that I'm here to be the most vibrant, thriving, optimal version that I can possibly be in this life. And that I have the right to be that. I don't have to compromise that for other people's insecurities about themselves. I have the right to be the example of possibilities, that everything can work out, and it really has so much to do with your imagination of yourself. So my relationship with my craft, with my art, has been a journey of reinforcing that and seeing that happen. And that's why I've been so dedicated to this, that it's like, this isn't a side project. This isn't just like an afterthought or a hobby on the side. It's like everything is pointing at this. And by doing so, it's freed me up to live in this way that's not constrained by frameworks that are outdated and don't apply to my infinite interdimensional self.
Yeah, and it's interesting how you say that it all came with this like surrendering and like trust, because that's what I'm still trying to figure out, if there is a mechanism or something which has to happen to everybody first in order to trust, because I feel like a reason why so many people are blocked is because they just don't trust in that higher law, like you call it, like the.
And there's an imagination of self that doesn't trust. It's like that there is that person's imagination of themselves, and I think some of the most powerful spiritual tools that we can implement and apply in our lives the principle of trust, the principle of forgiveness, and a principle of gratitude, principle of compassion. When these elements are at the forefront and are, kind of a driver in one's life, the miraculous can be commonplace. If that's like the foundation of your imagination of yourself are based on those principles, you're so much more freed up to a much higher frequency of experience and possibility that will just naturally gravitate towards that.
And when did you make this principle of trust, for example? Like, when did you make it a embodiment? Like,
I think it was kind of revealed to me in a way. I mean, I've been really radically transformed by the psychedelic experience. I mean, it's pretty evident in my work, I think. Anybody who's had those experiences can look at what I'm doing and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's had an influence. But yeah, it's been really, really beneficial for me. Yeah, early on, I had these experiences that with other people, that friends in high school, having these, going tripping on the weekends, and friends are like, yeah, the curtains are kind of moving, I guess, or yeah, it's extra colorful in here. And for me, it's like full blown shocking supernovas are exploding behind my eyelids, and I'm, dissolving into the infinite eternal ocean of oneness. Listening to my friends are like, yeah, it's kind of trippy, I guess. I'm like, kind of trippy? Like, here, let me show you what I'm seeing. And I'd have a sketchbook and start filling in these pages and be like, it's kind of like this, So yeah, I guess it kind of started with this need to convey the depth of this experience and being so enamored by this visionary experience that I'm like, is my pineal gland just on extra strength mode here? Is 100%. That just how I'm oriented? Because it seems like, I'm having a much deeper experience than you are. And
there's people, they trip, like you said, and they're not really changing that much. Like, I hear about people and they say like, oh yeah, I take mushrooms once in a while, or LSD, but then they're still the same people. And there's people, they change their whole state of consciousness forever. Like, and I'm just curious what it is. Is it like a personality trait, or is it literally like
some like extra chemical content in the brain?
Yeah. And for you, it's even crazier, because what I'm still, so when I look at your art, it's literally like a psychedelic trip for me, when I look at it. And I'm so curious, how can you keep this in your head? Like, how it's almost like you have like a photography, like you
like
take
a photographic memory.
Yeah, photographic memory, because it's so fast, and so it's vivid, but it's fast and it's chaotic. For me, I could never reinterpret it. So is there like how is the creative process for you? Like, how do you do that? Like, do you close your eyes and then like maybe you can?
Well, I think I've always had this really vivid inner vision.
Even now, right now?
Yeah. I mean, if somebody were to describe something to, or if I'm reading a book, it's like I'm watching a movie. Like my mind just fills it in visually, or somebody's giving me this really colorful list of adjectives to describe something. Like I'm imagining it and seeing it like rotating in my inner holographic viewing monitor as they describe it. And when I was a kid, I mean, to the present day, I have really vivid, extrasensory, multidimensional dreams that I tend to retain. And just because they're so engaging, there's so much that kind of emotional engagement with what's happening that it creates a kind of deeper imprint. I wake up and I'm like, oh, this happened, and whoa, then this thing, and
then you write it down in words, or do you actually sketch something?
Yeah, sometimes I sketch it. I've had really clear prophetic dreams. There's a painting that I did. I was teaching in Vienna and at the Visionary Art Academy, and the first 2 weeks, I was guiding the students through their process, how to just get the ball rolling, get ideas manifesting. And by the beginning of the third week, we're supposed to have everything all established, and then you're diving into your work of art for the following weeks after that. And so I was giving them all this attention to get them in their process that I wasn't really putting the attention on what I was going to do until the Sunday night into the Monday morning, where everyone had to have all of their established composition, including myself. Monday morning, I woke up from this incredible dream. I was on this landscape. I was looking up this mountain that was growing in front of me, and it was cracking open, and there was lava pouring out of this eye in the side of the mountain, and it was drifting all around me. And initially, in the part of the dream, I was alarmed and like, oh my God, this is like, a danger. And then from this mountain, this kind of benevolent earth goddess appeared and was pointing at the eye in her heart, and she, in this like kind of have no fear gesture and this look in her face. And so in the dream, I just settled into this place of comfort. And then I was on this rock island with all this lava pouring around me, looking up at this beautiful Gaia, earth goddess. And so I just opened my eyes while they were still half open. First order of business was to grab the sketchbook and just lay it all out as it was fresh, because it was a really impactful dream. It's just so much sensory content. And then I brought the composition, got started on the painting, and then I think by Friday I got the notice in the news that the volcano was erupting in Bali. And so I was like, oh, okay, yeah, it seems pertinent that was what the message was, a kind of precognition. So I started to put all this extra content in there where I was like, okay, I'm gonna put some distinctly Balinese elements in there, just to establish that that's what this painting was about. So I put this Naga serpent down on one side with a Balinese Om smoke wisp out the top of the head, and then I started to look through Google Images for a Balinese priest that I wanted to put like sitting on this rock island surrounded by and they were really distinct. They wear like very unique headgear with crystal beads and bells and vajras, and so I literally went through hundreds of photographs. I found this one. I was like, oh, that's perfect. The right angle, the right lighting. That'll be my reference. So I put that in there. And I ended up bringing the painting back to Bali, and I met with some friends whose family are in the Brahmin tradition, and their grandfather is a Brahmin priest. And so they were all gathered around. I presented this painting, and they were just matter-of-factly pointing out everything in the painting and the names of everything and what they mean and how they correlate and how it relates to Mount Agung, the volcano in Bali.
2017.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. And so, yeah, they were just as if I knew all of this beforehand, and they were just like, yep, this is the name of this, and each time the volcano erupts, there's a new being that's born with an 8-fold lotus at the top of its head, which is what I painted. I had this like kind of new being born out the top with this 8-fold mandala. And then of all the photographs that I happened to find, unknown to me, was this picture of a man named Menku Parahu, who is the man who is basically dedicated to appeasing the Naga serpent that lives in the top of Agung. And if the volcano erupts and he dies, then that's his assignment, basically.
What?
He stays there.
That's so crazy.
And so that was just who I happened to find the photograph of. I didn't know any of the backstory. I was just like, yep, perfect angle, perfect light source. I just happened to find the picture of that same guy that lives at the top of the volcano. So, I mean, things like that really stay with me. It's like, that's not a casual thing to me. That's not just like, oh, cool, how interesting. To me, that's like, okay, there's a much grander intelligence that's at play here that is informing this process, and that I'm in a particular vibratory condition that just allows for that communication to take place. And I can't claim ownership of it. I can't be like, I'm a psychic, it's like, I think we're all psychic. It's just a matter of how, what kind of fine tuning are you doing in your life to allow for that channel to be present. Yeah. I mean, I've had a lot of experiences like that, like just a kind of compulsion to do something. I don't know why. I have this vision. It happened in a dream, happened in a ceremony. It just kept coming up. Don't necessarily know what it means. It's just really trippy and cool. And I'm going to dedicate the next 4 months working on this thing. And as I'm working on it and I'm in that flow state, more things are just unfolding that I haven't really planned. They're just coming up. And then somewhere down the line, the story reveals itself through a series of circumstances or experiences that are like, oh, that's why I did that. That's okay. Now I know what the title of the painting is. Now I know what the painting means. I didn't know when I started, but now it's made clear to me through being invited to Burning Man, and I get to meet these incredible people that have a Buddhist Vajrayana school, and they just happen to bring in this story from the Avatamsaka Sutra, and they're like, yes, and that's what this means, and that's what's in your painting. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool, I didn't know that. Now I'm going to read the Avatamsaka Sutra and have my mind completely blown by this thing that I maybe wouldn't have found had it not been for being led to this person to give me that piece of information that's now opened me up to a whole other dimension of teachings, so things like that. It's just like being in a kind of, that's the flow state. It's not just the flow state of like, I'm just painting and I can't eat because I can't avert my eyes from this process. That's not just that part of the flow state. It's like stepping out of the ego narrative and stepping into the creative current, like instead of being looped in a little eddy on the side of the river, you've joined with the momentum of the river that's now moving unobstructed. You're getting out of the mental loops and just coming into alignment. And that universal creativity is informing all observable phenomena on every scale of existence. And it's fresh, it's novelty, it's newness, it's innovation, it's growth and development, it's happening everywhere all the time, from the point of origin to the end of time. That's the quality, that's the current. And for me, it's like, how can I live my life where I'm as close as possible to that? And I'm, just not getting bogged down by mental noise.
Allowing everything to just happen, and on the same time also being engaged in the process, right? Like
and being discerning with it all too. You can be in a place of surrender and allowance, but also be in a place of like, I'm going to move towards the most life-affirming, supportive direction and move away from things that are interfering with that. I don't want to surround myself with low vibrational expressions, because they can alter the signal. They can create a static discharge in that signal.
Where do you feel the most vibrational? Like, from all the places you've been, where do you feel like there's like, for you, the highest vibrational state where you can also put in like the work and you feel like creative and like supported?
Well, having really close access to wild nature is one of the best ways to just keep that connection intact. And the last 2 years here have been really incredible in that regard, in ways that I always knew, but once it's like you're fully in it, then it's
takes some time,
then it's really apparent how valuable that is, to have your bare feet on the earth and looking deep into the wild chaos of nature, and what that does to your thought process and your inner stillness. Having opportunities to lay naked in strong current rivers, and having the ocean just 5 minutes away, just having all of that as opportunities for pattern interrupts and resets of the system.
Was Koh Phangan a serendipity, or did you?
It was, yeah.
Yeah? How did you
sure.
end up here again? You were in Bali before, right?
Yeah, I was living in Bali for 15 years. And
15 years?
Yeah.
Okay, so you were settled, basically.
Yeah, I still had a lot of months of being a nomad as well. Mm-hmm. But I had I would have my year mapped out with these chapters. I'd be in Bali for 3 months to work for an Australian tour, to come back to Bali for 4 months to make way for Europe tour and festivals and exhibitions in the UK, and then come back for a couple months to work for Burning Man, come back to Bali to work for Australia. I would have this whole map laid out. And so I always had something on the horizon, and I'm like, okay, I'm here to get all this stuff prepared for that date up ahead. And over the years, I started to whittle it down. I mean, I was also really addicted to new experience. So when I'd be invited to a new country or a new festival, a new event in a place I'd never been to, I'd be like, yeah, I'd just say yes to everything. I just wanted to keep adding to the list of what I get to experience or places that I've never seen. But it can get pretty tiresome. It can really burn you out,
right?
And spread me really thin with the amount of things that I'm trying to accomplish. So I had to find ways that I have the right to say no to certain things. I don't have to it's not a disservice to the universe if I'm not going to create this thing or go to this place. I had to, concentrate it more. I can work on less things and make them way better, and
do less, but do it better.
Yeah. And also not the amount of energy required to be a presence at these big events and festivals. I mean, it's an adrenaline rush, but it's also just so much exertion.
Because everybody wants to talk with you, and all the eyes on you.
I think that later down the line, I found it so much more rewarding to have, less interaction, but like on a much higher quality level, like having a solo exhibition and meeting some really phenomenal people that are really doing great things. I mean, that's way more valuable than speaking to 100,000 people and like just having a few cool trip stories to share along the way. I mean, I don't want to discredit, because that's been incredibly valuable, but just as it's moved on down the line and just refining this process and where I'm choosing to bring it and who I'm choosing to expose it to, and being able to just up the level of recognition for what I'm doing. So I've been whittling it down. And so being in Bali, one of the main reasons I was there was having access to all these mediums. So I'd work with carvers and jewelers, wax carvers, tailors, leather workers, working with laser cutting machines, and just everything I could get my hands on. And then even in that, it's like, okay, I can't do everything. It's like, if I don't do that project, like I said, it's not a disservice as long as I'm really putting everything into, I can just like, and so coming here, I had to let go of a lot of those mediums that I had access to in Bali, but it brought everything into my painting. And so that's been a real elevation for me here, having this immediate access to wild nature and having just my painting. It created a depth in my process that was so distracted before.
Yeah, the paradox of choice, right? When you just have too much things going on at the same time, and then you get distracted. And what I also think is interesting.
I'm easily susceptible to distractions too. That's why I have to just craft my life in a way where it's like everything's all in front of me. It's like the things that I want to be focused on are right there available.
Yeah, to make it as simple as possible, like as little resistance as possible to do it, and then also to not be distracted. Yeah, I mean, Koh Phangan can also become distracting if you're in the community and.
Yeah, but I haven't really been so much. I mean, I'm not really here for the big parties or all of that. I mean, I've dipped into it here and there, and then I'm like, okay, that's good. I've made a little cameo appearance, but it's not really what I'm here for.
Yeah. So you're planning to stay here?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I went back to Bali recently, and I was reminded of all that stuff that I love, but I don't necessarily want to live there. But if it's easier to move around, then why not have this peaceful base here and then just dip into that for a bunch of just wild chaos and get into some more focused projects just for, go there for a month, work on some jewelry, come back, I think that's a better deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, jewelry, sculptures, paintings.
Yeah, I do really love all of that.
Yeah. And when did you do your last tattoo?
I did a pretty big piece on a friend in 2016. I got stuck in the UK with a broken ankle in the winter. It was really some tough conditions, but I had a friend that was really the most gracious host and housed me in her place for me to recover. And she was a tattooist and had a tattoo studio there, so I got to dip into it a little bit while I was there, and it was a lot of fun.
But I was also I remember from your interview, which I really enjoyed, the one I've also watched at your exhibition. I think it's also on YouTube, right? I'm gonna definitely put it in the show notes.
Heart Mission.
It's a really, really good interview. And I feel like you said something really important, especially also for our listeners, because those are young people who just maybe also want to like self-actualize, want to get their potential. You said that you were tattooing as a job. It was basically your job. But then at some point you realized it was not your vocation. It was not like your purpose.
Yeah, it kind of took over. It was a very all-encompassing medium, especially when the word gets out and, there's a clientele and word of mouth. This was before Instagram and all of this. So it was, it kind of just took over and felt like a limited medium for me. But because I had so much work available and it was a kind of financial safety net that was there. It was like I could travel with it. I could show up at any tattoo shop and be like, hey, here's my portfolio. Do you need somebody to work? It means they're not turning anyone away. So they would be like, yeah, great. Join the team for however long you're here. And so, just all of my creative process ended up being funneled through this very particular framework. I mean, it was fun at the time, but knowing that it's like, I'm so much more than this. And with it too, maybe I'm just too empathic, too psychically sensitive to people's unprocessed shadow material that tends to spill over into the field when they're getting tattooed. People that are going through these real vulnerable states, and they may not have anticipated that, like what they're going to end up going through and how vulnerable they're going to be. That I think just another way that I'm just naturally oriented, where I pick up on a lot of psychic matter and in what other people's processes are going through, and a time where I wasn't necessarily so skilled in my own personal boundaries, psychically, energetically, where I just kind of take it on. I think it kind of accumulated in my body metaphysically and physically. I started to get really serious repetitive stress in my body. It was to the point where I had to stop.
Because there was a sign, like almost like, again, like another sign of the universe that says like, Luke, that's it.
Yeah, because in a way, and this is a metaphor for so much of how my life has unfolded, where the message is there, where it's like, okay, this has to shift. There's so much more in store for you. You need to break out of your old form and move into this new dimension of yourself. And if I'm not actively taking those steps, then the steps will be made for me. Mm-hmm. And it was made for me in the form of a carpal tunnel aggravation in my joints and my muscles that made me stop. I had no choice, but that was so far down the line from like, I need to like ease up on this, or I need to put my attention into painting or into other mediums and just open up my creative dimension. But I'm just kept procrastinating that part because it's just more and more work available to do. And then eventually it was like, it became such a serious case that I had to go through some rehabilitation. Yeah, but in the end, that was the greatest blessing. I mean, not just orienting me wholeheartedly back into my painting and all these other mediums, but also the healing process itself was priceless. Even though it was such a painful time, it was like an existentially despairing time, because it was like I didn't know anything else other than my creativity. And for that to somehow be compromised, it was so painful in my heart. You know, it's like, how can I have let myself get to this place where now I'm suffering? And, you know, that was really, really difficult. That required some real soul exploration. And that's where I returned to the psychedelic experience and to this opportunity to be integrated into much more intentional use of it with ceremonies, with the plant medicines, and just found myself in a community that were very much about that. And so being able to be in that psychedelic threshold state, but in a supportive environment, to go completely cathartic with it, like just completely just like destroy your old self, you know, just be completely obliterated and just cry it all out and scream to the universe to like pull you from the bottom. And yeah, there was a major repair that happened in that state, but also everything that led out of that with the circumstances and the people and the community and everything that all fit into place in the perfect way to allow for this new version of myself to be more intentional with my journey and to be more an honoring of the medicine that this can provide. And there was also a part of that process too, like the visionary quality of that cathartic state, you know, being shown these visions that are so magnificent. And there's a quality to these plant medicines that is very clear that this is a sentient intelligence, much greater than my little monkey mind, that has my best interest in mind and has something to show me. You know, it's a consciousness, it's a sentient consciousness that has a gift for me. And so I would be shown these visions and I'd be like, wow, you know, thank you so much for showing me this. What do I do with this? Like, how do I bring this back? Like, how do I keep this with me so that this medicine stays with me? And the plant medicine would deconstruct the vision that it kept reiterating. It would break itself apart into all of these components that I was familiar with. I could see all of my own pre-existing art that I had made over the years were, you know, collaged fifth dimensionally into an environment and a kind of avatar being that was showing me this vision. And so because I had so much emotional engagement with all of this previous work, it allowed me to retain the details rather than it just being a fleeting glimpse. It was like, here's this painting you did in 1993 in your little apartment and when you're in college, and here's this sketchbook drawing you did for this guy's album cover. You know, it was like all this stuff, and it was all kind of like, just interlaced and collaged to create this kind of texture mapping into a space. And when all that's removed and I could see the kind of underlying architecture of the space, I could see these components that, you know, it's like, this is how I end up taking notes. It's like, okay, I get that, I get that, I get that. And I can just make up any one of these components. But when I combine them together, it's like a kind of foolproof way of recreating that psychedelic experience that's really accurate. And so that was a gift that I got from the medicine at that time when I was having to really reinvent myself creatively and had to figure out, well, if I don't have tattooing, I don't have this support thing, then what am I doing? Where's the direction? What is it that I'm trying to convey? And so that was the gift from the medicine. It's like, try recreating this, like play around with these elements and try and recreate this entheogenic dimension that is so familiar by so many people now. And if you can get it right, then people will relate to what you're doing, and people will support you because they want that medicine in their lives too, because they don't have the capacity to convey what it was that they had, but it had value to them. But it was a fleeting thing. but they have this memory of like, wow, you know, I was really moved by that, but I don't even have the linguistic lexicon to even begin to point in the direction of what that was. And yet here's art that is a photographic memory of what they experienced too. So that was a whole new reinvention of what it was that I was here to do with my art. And with that came a whole other community of people and a recognition on a global level from master artists that I've admired my whole life. They're now looking at me and they're like, yeah, you're awesome. You know, you're now a part of our group exhibitions. And so, and then that was just, yeah, a total dream to me to be included on the same exhibition walls as Alex Gray and H.R. Giger and Ernst Fuchs and Robert Venosa and, you know, all these guys that I had their books in college. I was like tripping in my little apartment on the weekends, like, wow, this is amazing, you know, one day. And yet here I am, like I'm getting accolades from my heroes. And so, yeah, to have that new chapter come out of such pain. And so how can I look at that pain as if like, oh, what a terrible time, or I wish that didn't happen. It's like, wow, thank you from the depths of my soul for that pain that I was brought, because that was what was needed to cathartically destroy my old self and get thrust onto this new path that had I just been complacent before, I wouldn't have got there, you know, or maybe I would have got there, but it would have taken much longer. And so being able to reflect on times like that of how pricelessly valuable that depth of despair, like hitting the bottom of my life and the like soul agony, you know? And then it's like, well, that was the gift in disguise. And so from that point, anything else that comes, no matter how uncomfortable, how can I look at it with resistance and be like, oh no, this shouldn't be happening, you know? Shake my fist at the universe. Like, no, it's given me this ability to be able to kind of be in more of a cruise control autopilot with all of it, pleasure and pain. You know, like it's all that has legitimacy. It's all valid. What's it here to teach me? I'm available and open to the lesson.
It's interesting how you say that you were already in this pain and there was already this like painful state you were in, and then on top of that you had like this plant medicine experience which shifted everything. Because what I also encountered in myself even is that sometimes I have those really crazy cathartic psychedelic experiences which show me the truth in the past, but after this, the experience is over, my ego is so fast in like refabricating the old structure again and telling me like, this was just an experience, you know? So I realized also now in the last few months where I didn't even use psychedelics in that sense, but I was in pain, you know? I had pain, like you said, and then I was like soul searching, that this is, it's like you said, that's the transformation you first have to go through, like to actually feel the pain, to be able to confront it, and then a psychedelic experience can enhance that effect. But if you're not able to face your own pain, you can even sometimes
be compounded on top of it.
Yeah, you can take a plant medicine journey and it reinforces your ego sometimes even. I saw people, they said after the experience like, everything's perfect, you know, even though in the experience itself, they were seeing for a moment what was going on.
Yeah, a big element of that psychedelic obliteration that I experienced. You know, I was going through such physical pain, and that was triggering a kind of an existential pain. This feeling of like, you know, I have no purpose if I don't have this. I don't know anything else. I'm not going to go to school to be a car mechanic now, you know, or whatever. It's like I was so dedicated to my creativity and it supported me in every way. For that to be compromised was so painful. And when I had that medicine ceremony, I was able to look inside the matrix of my body. I was having this kind of macro view into the cell structure, into the tendons and the ligaments. I was looking like X-ray vision into the inside of my body. My awareness was being like, it was on such a metaphysical level. I could see almost like around the muscle fibers themselves was this Rubik's Cube-like mosaic matrix of language was encasing the fibers and the muscles and the tendons and the fascia. And it was this matrix of self-imagination. I could see this languaging in there that was so self-defeating and self-sabotaging. Language was like gripping everything.
Your own narrator, huh?
Yeah, the own narrator that just didn't believe in myself and my own potential. That was like deep inside, like to actually was like holding back the physical form. And so the medicine was allowing me to go to the inside of that matrix and summon the presence of infinite unconditional love and just allow that to be present. And it was like, it was emerging from within and allowing the loosening of the grip that this had. And the more sustained that unconditional loving presence state could be, the more everything would just relax and let go and be replaced with this life-affirming language that was there all along. It was just being overridden by this other quality that, and I could see that, you know, I've come from an amazing family, a supportive family. I come from my mother's an artist. She's a photographer, and my father's a musician, and they weren't really getting in the way of any of this process. They were like, great, do it, you know? So I'm so grateful for that. Yeah. So to see this kind of self-sabotaging, self-defeating language within the structure of the matrix, it allowed me to see that it was so transpersonal. It wasn't like this came from an unsupportive family or being in a place, a restrictive society. It wasn't any of that. It was something that was way deeper. It was in the human condition, this kind of unworthiness in the matrix. And so and seeing it on that level gave me the ability and the right to let it go more easily, because it was less identifiable as my own. It was something that was like
transpersonal. Yeah,
it was something that was just, it was like the fear frequency in the human matrix that had given its power away to another, you know, to a priest, to a government, to parental figures, any place where you've displaced your personal sovereignty and infinite power outside of the self to another and made oneself be small and worthless, you know. That's how it was visually in the structure of my body. That was my rehabilitation, was on that level of the matrix. Was like, okay, so if that's not true and unconditional loving eternal presence is the truth, then I'm going to be in alignment with that, and that I have the right to be that in every part of my life, in every way. So all of that noise that says that I'm not, I don't have to give that any attention. It can throw its tantrum and try to like reinsert itself and convince me of how real it is and how I need to have my attention on it. But there's a much stronger presence of light that it's like, just ignore it, you know, like don't even give it any attention. And then by not giving it attention, it's like, hey, gets louder, like just don't ignore me. And then it just becomes a cartoonish buffoonery. It becomes like a caricature of itself. It's like,
that's really good if you can actually see it as that.
Yeah,
that's healing as hell, man.
I mean, and this is a kind of description of the visionary state that I've experienced. I've seen it in these terms. This is like the movie that I've watched in that entheogenic dimension. I've seen it play out in all this symbolic interplay, you know. And so, yeah, it was a really pivotal moment in my life, and it really defined so much foundation for how I operate. how I interact with the world, and where my attention is, where my energy is, and what, there are these things that it's like, no matter the noise level, you have the right to just not engage with it. You can just keep slicing its head off. Like, it doesn't apply, and so that to me is a discipline, just like painting is a discipline, just like working out is a discipline, just like making sure you're eating the right things and not eating the wrong things. It's like, where's your attention? What is your priority? Where is your discipline? And so it's like, how motivated are you to be your greatness? How worth it is it to you? Are you going to get complacent again and just eat shitty food and hang out with abusive people and do a job you hate? Or are you going to scrap all that and make sure you're like getting up to work out in the morning and do these things are good for you?
Yeah, attention is an interesting one, man. Like, I'm obviously also on my path with everything. But for me, when I look at like eating healthy or training, that was like an easy thing for me to master compared to mastering the attention in my head. Like, where is it? Like, is it, like you said, the critic? Am I like listening to this guy who's never happy and never satisfied? Or am I actually like being here?
And are you in essence that being? Is that your nature, or is that just a program that you have the ability to change? If you're just not identified, like, I am the self-defeating voice. It's like, no, I am eternal, multidimensional consciousness that's experiencing infinity in a finite form, essentially.
Yes.
So if I keep reminding myself of that, then it's like, okay, all right, I'm on track. I'm like, now where's my priority? Why am I like engaging in this energy sucking nonsense over here? Like, forget it. This is where it's at.
It's funny, in the moment you said slicing the head off it's like a discipline. For some reason this monster from Hercules came to my mind. The Hydra or something.
Yeah.
When you slice it, there's two heads coming out. And sometimes I really feel when I'm resisting to that voice and I try to like kill it, it actually like gets worse. So it's still for me sometimes in certain phases a challenge to it. And it's funny that you said it's not even your parents, because obviously you can say like, your parent, it's the voice of your father or your voice of your mother, but it is somehow still like this ego survival system in place. Like it served us all those millions of years to come to this particular point, but now everything is almost like so safe that we're like, why? We don't need you anymore.
Yeah, I just got another painting commission for someone to do a painting of Fudo Miyoo. I don't know if you're familiar with that name.
Fudo.
I'm excited to do this painting because I love the subject. He's in the Japanese Buddhist pantheon. He's a really highly revered figure. He's really gnarly looking. He's a really wrathful. In the Buddhist tradition, you have the Dharmapalas, which are like the active, get on with it principle. Like they have the Bodhisattvas are like the attractive, compassionate principle that you're emulating and moving towards, and the Dharmapalas are behind you with all their spirit weapons, like basically like slicing through illusion, and they're really like fierce and scary looking. But that's the form that they would take if they're threatening to your ego, essentially. And so Fudo he's got the contorted face. He's got one eye looking up, one eye looking down, one tooth pointing up, one tooth pointing down, and he's got a lotus growing out of the top of his head. But the story goes that he's the only one that, like, as all the others are sitting on a lotus throne, he's the only one that has the lotus growing out of his top of his head, because he's depicted at the bottom of hell, like the deepest, darkest depths of the psyche of the human condition. And his name means the immovable one. And he's got this flaming sword with a Vajra handle. And he's in this like cocoon of flames. He's got a rope covered in thorns and hooks. And he's surrounded by armies of demons. And they're all around him with all their weapons drawn. And they're just not making a move until he does. They're waiting for him to engage. And he just sits there and he's got everything he needs to subdue them all and just like wipe them all out. But he stays in this unwavering meditative focus and just stays in this acknowledgement that all is one, there is no other, and that all of this is illusion. And for him to engage in fighting with them would be to agree that they are something other than the self. There's a polarity involved. And so instead his job is just to keep them all fixated in one place, by not engaging. Yeah, by not engaging, he's just like, yeah, the stories about him are really, I just think it's such a inspiring kind of metaphor.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah, because it's just sometimes
there's nothing to fight. There's nothing to, it's all just integration and acknowledgement as the one, consciousness experiencing itself as every possibility in order to know itself. But yeah, just be in that place of minimal resistance. There's a balance between being in that equanimous acceptance, discernment, what you choose to engage with. And it doesn't mean that you agree with everything that's going on, but there is a place where you can be in that kind of equanimous balance within yourself that is not struggling or fighting.
Something which I also came across when I've read your website bio was that you were also studying arts, like fine arts. You have like a bachelor. And since one of my biggest missions in life is to actually help people to find their right education, like their right path. And I'm just curious how much you would value that time in that university for your future mission and purpose, like everything you did. Do you feel like in order to become a real artist, you have to be attending that, have a bachelor's degree, or do you feel like...
Not necessarily. I think I would value it much more now than I did then. I feel like I would get a lot more out of it now than... But then at the same time, there are things that just became ingrained in my perception that maybe I would take for granted, and it's just the way I just see that I could trace back to then, with just amount of obsession with color study and composition and all these things that at the time were just like, oh God, these things that I have to just keep doing for my class. But now it's just like, it just allowed me to have a kind of creative default setting where I'm not even thinking about it. It's just how I perceive. But yeah, I got a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree at the Ontario College of Art, which I've never had to show anyone for any reason. Not like I had to put it on a job resume or anything, But yeah, at that time when I was having these psychedelic awakening visionary experiences, initially it was like having this really unique, distinctive, creative aesthetic that was unique to myself, applied to everything I could imagine. Microphone stands, make bronze cast door handles, make stained glass windows, make furniture, I was seeing my body as my own art project and covering myself in like a full bodysuit, tattoos. I wanted to work with tailors and just make outfits to just be my own avatar. It was like anything that I could think of was filtered through this lens of this unique aesthetic principle that was awakening within me. And so shortly after that, I had this incredible opportunity, which I don't think is available now, but the high school that I was at, I ended up changing to another high school that had a college level art program in it. And so the first morning, the class, I'd have geography, math, science, etc. But then from lunch onwards, I was doing filmmaking and ceramics and life models, drawing and illustration and pretty much everything, jewelry. I got to do all this stuff. And so I never really specialized in anything because I just wanted to just channel it into any possible medium that was available. So that was really an amazing way to just be in alignment with my life's purpose in high school, which is, I think it's really rare for that age to be definitely really clear about what it is I'm doing and where it's going, and to have a school opportunity where all that can be directed. I don't even think that school exists anymore. Mm-hmm. Like they've shut all that down. But because I went to that high school, it allowed me to advance years into this art college, which is like one of the big art colleges in Toronto, in Canada. And so yeah, I got to skip all the foundation stuff. But then being in that school, I think I really wish that I had more involvement with my instructors, where they'd pretty much just let me do what I was doing. It was just like, I'd be tripping on the weekend and I'd do a painting, I'd bring it to them, they're like, great. Like, great. Like, what am I paying you for? Like, this is the most expensive rent on this school, the studio space. Like, I wish I had more, I think they just didn't get me. I was just way out there. And I was surrounded by so much narcissistic nihilism and people just drowning in their own self-importance with just nonsensical art speak. And I just didn't relate to any of it. It just wasn't engaging to me. It wasn't aesthetically beautiful. It was just people that knew how to write essays and do this, there was just...
art is a broad field, right?
Yeah, I just felt like such a freakish alien in that building. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I have for a lot of my life, but I'm accepting of that. I'm not like, I'm perfectly happy being myself. I don't need the approval. But yeah, it was especially apparent when I was in art school and just feeling like I was just left to do my own thing and then get marked at the end.
Did you have mentors in your life, like afterwards?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
incredible. Yeah, and even when I was in high school, when all of this was awakening for me, when I was having this psychedelic awakening, there were some people in my life that were incredible examples of what it is that I aspired to be, that just came into my life, like people that lived their life as a supported artist. That were just incredible examples that this is how it's done. They lived everything about their life was about their art, and they were abundant and they were recognized and supported. So that was really, really helpful for me.
Any particular mentor which gave you something really valuable you're still like thankful for, like something very particular, like a skill, like a tool, or like a mindset, or like a habit, or
yeah, I mean, there's been so many, all having their own personal keys to the vision. I think when I first became friends with Alex Gray, was where that really was brought up several notches on the ladder, because it was when I was being given this opportunity to be a part of these group exhibitions with people like Alex Gray and people that I admired, and to be considered amongst their ranks was really a big deal for me. And it was a bit overwhelming too, because it felt like, okay, now I can't just play around. Now I have to keep coming up with something extraordinary. Like now it's like, I can't just put out something unsuccessful. It's like everything I do needs to be the next level that was presented before. That was the feeling. But I was just putting that on myself. By letting go of that, creates the space for that extraordinary thing to come through. But if I'm like too fixated on like, it needs to be this great, or it needs to, I need to be really making this awesome thing, like by letting go of the outcome, it creates the space for that magnificence to come through in a way. But Alex Gray has been a really wonderful mentor and ally. He's been a big supporter, and he was just a great example to see how to navigate it all, because he's like a celebrity artist.
Crazy, huh?
He has like so much attention on him, and that amount of attention was like really apprehensive to me. I was like, I don't want my face associated with all this. I just want the art to be the thing. I don't want to have to like speak for myself or like be. But I mean, it turns out I'm pretty comfortable with that now. You know? But yeah, he was just a great example of like how to navigate all those levels too, of just being this psychedelic, intrepid explorer, channeler, artist, but then also being out there, like being a kind of celebrity with it. And so just seeing how that's managed was helpful for me.
Yeah, the thing is, the tricky thing about the fame is that you can't control it. Like you can say like, I want to have a little bit more like exposure. Let me talk to this one podcast, or let's just do this one painting, and let's just come to this exhibition. But then all of a sudden it takes its own life, and you can become very, very famous, not overnight, but it goes faster than sometimes you think. And then it's hard to then control it, right? So do you ever feel sometimes that there is a certain expectation pressure on you since you became more?
I was feeling that for a while. I mean, I have withdrawn somewhat from a lot of what I was involved in for the last, I don't know, however many years. Like just being here in Koh Phangan has been this whole other level of insular kind of spiritual focus. And I haven't been traveling. I haven't been engaged in all this stuff in the same way. And yeah, I've just been treating this time as more of like a refinement. I'm in this like kind of nature dojo state.
What's with creativity blocks? Like, do you have certain long-term phases in your life? Did you have certain like periods where you were like, I don't want to do anything, or like something completely out?
Yeah, it comes and goes. But yeah, I've come to the place where, I want to minimize the resistance in my system. Yeah. And so if I'm in a place where like, it needs to be like this, or I'm like fighting with myself internally, I need to address that. And you're like, okay, let's look at that, what I'm creating. And it's actually, I'm impeding the flow by engaging in that kind of relationship with the universe, of like, it's supposed to be like this, it should be like this, and why aren't I like this? But just be in a state of acceptance, like, okay, it ebbs and flows. I've seen the cycles. I see there are times where it's just like, I can't control it. It's like the pressure of a fire hose is just coming through, and I'm just channeling it into all these directions. And then there are times where that wave subsides, and then I'm just focused elsewhere. I'm like not as engaged in so much activity, and that's okay too. It's all acceptable as long as it's all part of the growth curve. And so I had these times here where I'm not as productive, but I'm physically training and I'm meditating. I'm doing breath work. I'm doing all these other disciplines. It's all part of the process. And so I'm accepting of that this is what this chapter's about right now, and that's perfect.
It's probably really hard for people listening sometimes to comprehend that this is actually possible, to not have like a certain 365 days a year structure of like, this is 5 days this, 2 days this, like weekend, that you can actually say like, hey, creativity block, there's a chapter of training, breath work, just like exploration. And
it's not necessarily an easy thing to regulate. Sometimes it just has a mind of its own. And I've lived my life in a way that just allows for that to appear. And if it means I'm just following these channels, I'm working on 5 paintings at once, I may not be as available or accountable, or I'm just like, I'm in this process and I have to just ride it, then I'm accepting of that. And if other people aren't, then it's not my concern in a way. It's like, this is where I'm at,
It's beautiful. It's really like one of the probably best states you can be, at peace with yourself, with the process. And I really like
prioritize peace in myself.
Yeah.
That's a priority.
Yes. Funny, it became a priority for me too here in Koh Phangan. Like I became really sensitive to resistance. So sometimes when I feel like, I'm not able, like my calendar says you should work out at like 12, but I'm like, not yet, and then I just wait a little bit more, and it feels way better afterwards. Or like, but the thing is, there's also this like you said, it's hard to regulate it, because where do you stop? Like when does this like self-discipline versus complacency, right? Like where does it go?
When I see the outcome of those disciplines, when I see like the work that I've put into myself and I see the results, then it's like, yeah, I want those results. I mean, the discomfort in, what it takes to get that result is more acceptable. It's like, yeah. I mean, I had this experience years ago that was really another pivotal moment of realization. Early on, having this new level of recognition amongst my peers and my art heroes, and wanting to just like be really productive and really working hard, and like I have to just manifest every vision that comes through, even if I burn out, and not necessarily putting the same attention as I do now into my physical being with my practices that I do with breath work and exercise and all these things to just keep my system fine-tuned to be able to channel these kinds of frequencies. I found myself really easily overwhelmed. I would get psychedelic, and it's like I'm trying to pull the ocean through a pinhole. I'm like frying my system with this like too much of a high frequency that my nervous system can't handle. And so that kind of made me more disciplined in a lot of my physicality. And I had this incredible opportunity to take part in a peyote church meeting with Native people in the United States, very traditional setting. It was phenomenal, but really tough. I mean, not a casual experience, not like a fun ride. It was like you're there to work and let go and like be of service to the universe. And they were doing these incredible displays with the embers of the fire and pulling them out into these Thunderbird emblems. And they had I love this shirt you're wearing, but they had these macaw feather fans with the exquisite beadwork. I mean, everything about this was so aesthetically exquisite. It was like the beauty way. But this was like 16 hours in a teepee, just like hurling and just, letting go of everything that doesn't serve you or your community. It was really intense. I was with a friend of mine, and I had this vision that was so vivid. It just kept coming up, and part of my dream process is just being able to kind of speak it aloud. It's like my sketchbook is my voice too. If I can like kind of describe something, then I can retain it a little better. So with my friend, I was like, this painting would be fucking unbelievable if I could just do the next 10 years working on this painting. It would just, that would be it. I could sign out. And so I was describing everything about it. It had this crystal skull in the center and this kind of fractally cocooned, like Tutankhamun style encasing of all of these spiritual traditions and calendar systems and temple structures. It was like this consolidation of all of these spiritual traditions at the end of time. It was just, this vision was so outrageous. And I was describing all the nuts and bolts of this entire composition. And after this ceremony was done, we ended up coming back into the city. We were outside of San Francisco. And I was invited to this event, art exhibition, got to meet all these artists that are now deeply a part of my life. One of which was this man named Carrie Thompson, who's now, one of my soul brother allies. We've been through so much together. But this was my initial meeting with him. Was him arriving at the event with this new painting that he had just finished. The oil paint was still wet. He had strapped it to the top of his van, was like rushing to get it finished and to the exhibition on time. And in the Geary Tunnel and rush hour traffic, somebody had like pulled up next to him dressed like Santa Claus with a big white beard, pulls up to him to the traffic lights like, hey, I think you dropped something back there in the tunnel. And he realized the painting had come loose and was like in the middle of rush hour traffic. He has this full-on heart palpitation, does a U-turn, comes back. There's this painting in the middle of rush hour traffic with all the cars just parting around it, totally intact. This like happened minutes before I'm meeting him. He shows up with this painting and tells us this story of this angelic intervention on this masterwork of his. So then that night he brings us to his studio, and lifts the sheet off this huge painting, like the height of the ceiling. And it's the painting that I was describing to my friend in the ceremony. I'm with my friend, so he's my witness. He knows what I described to him with all the components. And here it is. We're looking at it. I was just like, wow. I felt so relieved. Wow. It was like, wow, the pressure is off. I don't have to do this painting. He's already done it. You know, it's like all creative possibilities are all already existing. It's like, if I don't get to it, someone else will, and that's okay. I don't need to take credit for it. You know, that was a big one for me.
Yeah, it's crazy how, I mean, now hearing the stories out of your interview, it just really feels like a big journey, and I'm pretty sure it's also not over soon. I mean, even here, how we met, how the idea came together. When we met, I didn't even know that we're going to call this place here the 5 Elements Villa. And then for some reason we realized, like, hey, there's like 4 rooms, 4 different elements. And then we saw your paintings and we just started to like put them together. So you were also like a big maker of this place here somehow. Like a lot of people, a lot of people are like really like can't wait to see the place with all the different rooms. We're obviously still in it. It's also a big process, obviously, but yeah, now with your latest art piece here, I'm really pumped. I guess what I feel with the energy for me, what is always with artists is like you don't just have the art, you have like the energy which flew into this art piece, right? Like there's like a part of you vibrating in this place now, so it's pretty dope.
Yeah, there's something that I was really influenced by that. It's just part of the foundation of my operating system. I don't know if you're familiar with a man named David Hawkins. He wrote a book called Power versus Force. It's one book that really changed everything for me. That's one of the top of the list books that I would recommend to read. Okay. He basically, it's a, I don't know how to condense this story of him, but it's all about kinesiology and being able to access the universal mind through muscle testing, and that muscle testing is communicating the universal mind essentially. Mm-hmm. And so it's become an opportunity to use radical discernment on one's own spiritual progression to be able to determine what is either life affirming or life is detrimental to life. And so he was given this vision, I guess, of the scale of consciousness and how it moves through this exponential progression from the lowest, most larval levels of consciousness, from like scarcity, war, fear, anxiety, starts to move into there's like a threshold that determines one state to another, which is essentially there's the force, which is foundational in separation consciousness, that you are not intrinsically related to everything in all of existence. You are a separate entity that has no effect on the world outside of you other than by force. And then somewhere on that scale of consciousness, there's a determining threshold that changes it to power, which is to come into vibrational coherence and alignment with the field in which you are embedded. And in that threshold is determined by the surrender to a higher intelligence. And then you start moving into higher dimensions of love and unconditional love and emotional intellect, all the way to the highest calibration of enlightenment. And it's an exponential frequency. So it moves, once you move past that threshold, it's like goes from 10 to 1,000 to 1,000,000 to, it's like, that's what exponential means. It just, and so we're in this process of collectively moving through that scale. We've been in this, this particular spectrum on one end, and then somewhere along the line of human development, there's a certain percentage in the collective consciousness that have made that shift to move into unconditional love. But because it's an exponential frequency range, it becomes that much more influential on the field of psychic development of the planet. And so by testing kinesiologically, it's proven that, yes, we have actually crossed that threshold together, and we're now moving in this direction where like it's like the choice has already been made. We're choosing to move towards enlightenment together. And so all of these previous expressions of force no longer have the same ability to influence the collective. But one of the things that he described that I thought was really, really amazing, and this is something that would be tested over and over, thousands of test subjects, and the answers are always the same every single time. And one of the prime examples of how this works, so one of the tests that they've done in auditoriums all around the world with thousands of people in the audience, and they've done this in countless countries, countless situations where they say they have 2 blank envelopes. No one in the audience knows what's in each one. You'll hold one envelope up and you muscle test people in the audience, and people go weak. You hold up another envelope, every single person goes strong. And then you open the envelopes. One has MSG powder. The other has vitamin C. And so one is life-affirming, one is detrimental. And it's not even like your conscious mind is acknowledging, oh, MSG, not good for me. Vitamin C, yeah, great for me. Mm-hmm. It doesn't even have to have that level of conscious acknowledgement. It's just being in the presence of it. The body understands because it's the universal mind that's acknowledging itself. And so that was like kind of like a prime example of how that functions. And so one of the things that he's done, he's put out so many books on this subject, but one of the things was muscle testing works of art and like masterworks in the history of art or music or historical figures. And you can test the calibration of the consciousness of whatever that creative act was, will be an imprint in the akashic field of the calibration of the consciousness of the person that created it. So whatever state they were at when they did that creative act is like a stamp, like an imprint, or like an acupuncture needle in the matrix. It's like a gong has been struck, and that frequency is now reverberating forever because of that creative act. And so he would do all these tests with, Michelangelo and all the different stages of his life and all the artworks that he made. And that towards the later stages of his life, he had gone through these radical spiritual overhaul, surrender to divine love experiences. And then his art was reflective of that. And, he did the same with classical composers and what they went through in their life and the music they made. And so it actually calibrates at a really high level. In psychological terms, there's a condition called Stendhal syndrome, Stendal. And this is a documented state of consciousness that has been documented in thousands of cases. And essentially it's like a kind of ecstatic condition that is triggered by the presence of certain works of art or music, where people just like go into complete eyeball rolling catharsis, ecstasy, just by being in the presence or viewing something or hearing something. It's called Stendhal syndrome. And so one of the prime examples of Stendhal syndrome is the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo's masterwork. The Sistine Chapel has had like thousands of cases of Stendhal syndrome by just walking into that room and just like having that triggered. And so David Hawkins was proposing this because Michelangelo calibrated at such a high level of consciousness. He was in the realm of unconditional loving presence, and that's what inspired him to do that painting. That now that painting calibrates at that level of consciousness. And so if you are, susceptible or open enough vibrationally, or you're like in a state of like being able to be vibrationally congruent with that calibration of consciousness, then it'll like trigger that state. And so I thought that was really fascinating. And he gave all these examples of that. So it kind of reinforced this feeling of being responsible with what I'm doing. I'm not just going to just vomit on a canvas and give it a title. You know, I want it to be, you know, of merit and have some benefit to the viewer, and to be beautiful, and to, you know, for it to trigger some kind of, you know, life affirming quality.
That's why I'm grateful that we chose to work together.
Yeah.
And we have this cool place now, and yeah, and also really cool
Just keep it high vibrational.
Yeah. Yeah, my friends. 5 Elements Villa, Luke Brown, 2022. Yeah, maybe some people will have a Ken doll moment when they come here. Who knows? Thank you so much for your work, brother.
Yeah,
and
man.
for the time in this really interesting conversation. A few really cool downloads for me.
Nice. Well, I just live down the road, so you can do this anytime.
All right. We are out. Peace.